There you go.
Okay, wonderful. Well, this evening, oh, hang on, I've just got that message there. There we go. So, in my part of this evening, I'm going to give everyone an overview, and it's a very broad brush overview of the admissions process. If you're a sophomore or a freshman here, um, there are some specifics that I would give you, but just for the sake of time, we're going to focus on the admissions piece. It's good for you to be thinking about this so that you can also start planning ahead. Okay, so my name is Ben Cooper, and as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from here. I grew up in Australia. I went to law school in Australia. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I started my legal career as a litigator in Australia and am admitted to the Queensland Supreme Court and to the Australian High Court. And then in 2009, I relocated to the UK and I took my exams and requalified as an attorney in London, where I worked in banking and financial services litigation. Then I ended up at Baylor University and I spent a little over 5 years running the pre-law program there and now run Pre-Law Pro. Law school admissions, it's a little bit of a game, and half of the trick is understanding the rules to that game. If you see there in the bottom of the screen, there's a little QR code. If you scan that at any point this evening, it will take you to a Calendly page. I will meet with anyone who wants to just get a little bit of a plan and a strategy together for free. So throughout that presentation, if you feel like meeting with me one-on-one at some point in the next few weeks would be helpful, just hit that QR code and you can go ahead and make that reservation. So when it comes to thinking about the legal profession, we often have some preconceived ideas in mind that have been shaped by what we see in the news, in the media, movies and films. Suits, for example, is a really entertaining show, but not realistic in any way. And we just have sometimes these distorted images. It's also really important that as we approach law school, we have a really clear understanding of what it is that lawyers do and the things that they don't do. Lawyers aren't social workers. They're not crime fighters. If they're prosecutors, they're working with law enforcement, as opposed to some of the dramatic portrayals that we see. They're not playing golf every Friday. They're not, even those in big law are not instant millionaires. If you're a litigator, the chances are you're not going to be in court all the time. You know, there are a handful of exceptions. For example, like working in a DA's office, you're going to spend a considerable amount of time in court. But there's just these misrepresentations, and it's really important that we get an accurate picture. Now, the American Bar Association has expressly told us what law schools are going to be looking for when they're looking at applicants. And they want to see a really strong skill set that's defined by these specific skills. And the good news for you as potential applicants is you can develop this skill set in almost any major. So there's this myth that has been perpetuated for a very long time that says if you want to be a lawyer, you have to be a political science major. And you absolutely can be a political science major, but there's absolutely no expectation. So these are the skills that they're going to be looking for. Now, the road to a legal career is a long one. Okay, we ideally are looking for 4 years of consistent academic performance where you're building your academic skills and your expertise. You ideally are developing relationships with faculty and building networks. And then for many of you, between junior and senior year, you're preparing for the LSAT, which is a very demanding process. It's going to require several months of consistent preparation. Then after you've taken the test, you're going to be putting together a detailed application, which in itself, and for those of you who are going through the process now, you're already experiencing just how demanding that can actually be. Then once you're admitted, then you start law school. And it doesn't matter how demanding your undergraduate program is, the demands of law school are going to be unlike anything you've experienced before. So it's going to be 3 very demanding years with no summers off, because ideally in those summers, you're off working in a law firm. Then when you graduate, it's getting ready for the bar exam. And it's then and only then that you get to begin your career as a baby lawyer. for a lot of us, we have this expectation that you have to go K through JD, that the idea of getting work experience or of not going straight on to the next phase of your education is a negative, that it somehow represents you falling behind. And I just want to, from the start, tell you that you could not be further from the truth. There are so many strong points or so many advantages to going and getting some work experience. And that's especially the case if maybe you're graduating early, or if you're not 100% crystal clear on wanting to go to law school and understanding why getting work experience is going to be tremendously helpful. And what you'll find is your average first year student, your average 1L, is not a 22 or 23-year-old. They tend to be 26 or 27, depending on the study that you actually look at. So with that in mind, it's important to remember that even if you show up at law school at 25, 26, you will not be old. There are going to be people in their 30s and 40s in class with you. It's also very important to remember that law firms like it. Law firms and their clients like it. And I can tell you this from experience because I started very young because of the jurisdiction that I began my career in. And what you'll find is if you're a 55-year-old successful business person and your lawyer looks like they just started to shave or they just got out of college, you've got to work really hard to get their trust. There's also some life stuff that you just simply haven't had a chance to get exposed to. So getting that experience can also help with getting a job while you're in law school and a post-law school job. The law schools love it. The law schools recognize that there are some things that you just cannot learn in a classroom. There are some things that you can really only learn from doing. Some of those things are interpersonal things. I started out my legal career with a secretary who had more experience as a legal secretary than I had life. And she knew a lot. And yet I was supposed to supervise her. And so no one teaches you as a 24, 23-year-old how to supervise someone who's got more experience than you do life. So the law schools really value that experience. The other thing is it's just going to give you some perspective. I have never met a lawyer who took a gap year or two who has regretted it. You just get a different picture of life. You think about things in a little bit of a different way. And there's a pressure that comes in the workforce that once you learn how to cope with that, makes going back and studying a lot more of a manageable process because you've experienced the unique stress of the workplace. Know before you go. Unfortunately, there are people who will go to law school because they don't know what to do next, or they have unrealistic expectations of what being a lawyer looks like. And that can lead to unhappy lawyers. That can lead to people spending money on a degree that they ultimately don't want to use. So you need to understand what it is you want to get out of law school. You need to ask yourself, is there a faster, cheaper, more direct path? And if you want to be a lawyer, then obviously the path is law school. But there are also careers where having a law degree can be seen as an advantage. And so the question is this the best way for you to be spending your time and money? The only way you'll know that is if you're talking to lawyers, if you're researching, if you're going to court and interacting with the profession and getting that, really important intelligence. What's important to remember here is that you might think, why would a lawyer talk to me? What do I have to bring to the conversation? What you'll find is that the overwhelming majority of lawyers really care about giving back to the next generation of lawyers. So I think you'll be surprised at just how willing people are to make time to answer your questions, to expose you to what being a lawyer is like, so you can make a really informed decision. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the application process itself. It's important to remember that law schools will look at your application holistically, which is to say it's never about one single factor. Your numbers matter, okay? But it's never about just a GPA or just an LSAT score It's about who you are as a complete applicant. And that means if you've got great numbers, you can make yourself an outstanding applicant. If you have numbers that aren't ideal, putting together a really strong application can mean that you outperform those numbers. Now, applications are going to involve several different components. You're going to need a test score. There are schools that will take alternatives to the LSAT. So the GRE is a very popular test that many schools will now accept. There is also a number of schools that will accept what's called JD Next, which is a brand new assessment. So there are alternatives. If you take the LSAT, however, that is the score you're going to have to use, even if you do well on the GRE subsequently. So if you're considering an alternative test, consider that before officially taking the LSAT itself. You're going to need a GPA, and that GPA is going to be comprised not just of your undergraduate grades, but of any dual credits that you might have had, for example, during high school. They need to get uploaded into what's called the Credential Assembly Service, where all of your transcripts go from your institutions directly to the LSAC. They then get entered into the system. That can take about 2 weeks. So that's something you don't necessarily want to leave till the end. You will need to obviously have an LSAC account in order to upload those transcripts. And that account is going to be the portal through which you process all of your applications. You will have to do a personal statement. There is an exception to that, which we're going to talk about shortly, but for the most part, you're going to need a personal statement. There are often optional essays. Now, they're optional, but in name only. There is no real good reason for you not to give a school more information and more reasons to admit you. Diversity statements. So many of you will be aware of what happened recently with the Supreme Court and the outlawing or the prohibition of race-based admissions. But diversity will continue to be a very important consideration for schools. And what we'll see shortly is that they're still going to be giving you opportunities to talk about that, but they're going to be doing it in a slightly different, more roundabout way. You may also wish to submit what's called an addenda. And that addenda is essentially giving the school some extra context or information that you think they might need as they consider your application. You'll need a resume. And then once those transcripts have been uploaded, you'll get a CAS report. And that CAS report is going to go to the schools and give them an outline of all of the key pieces of data that they need to know about your academic performance as an undergraduate. All right, so let's talk about test scores. We're going to talk primarily about the LSAT, even though, as I mentioned, there are alternatives to it. And the reason for that is the LSAT is the only test that every ABA accredited law school accepts. It is also the test for which we have the most historical data. We can look at a school and your LSAT score and have a pretty good idea of your scholarship prospects, but also to have an idea of whether you're likely to be a presumptive admit to that school. You have to take the preparation for this test seriously. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people think of it like the ACT or SAT. It's a test that you can learn to do well on, but it does take time. And in the same way that learning an instrument or acquiring a second language takes consistency and patience, the LSAT is the same way. If you're not ready, don't take it. And we'll talk about some of the downsides of taking it before you're ready shortly. But you have a lot more time than you think. And I think a lot of people get into trouble when they feel like they have to take it by a particular date, whether or not they're ready. There are some free options to give you, some preparation. But what I think you'll find is that you will get what you pay for. And you will see repetition of questions sometimes on these free programs. The other thing is your scholarships are going to be largely determined by your LSAT score. So investing a very modest amount in the LSAT and taking that preparation seriously can actually save you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition. You can retake the LSAT, and there are good reasons to do that, but there are limits. There are downsides to scoring over and over and over again in a range that isn't helpful and reiterating an assumption, but you can retake it. What I see too often is people retake it before they fix their underlying problem. So they end up repeating or actually doing slightly worse than they did. So be patient and take it when you're ready. Now, here is a rough LSAT timeline, okay? It's rough because people have different circumstances, so just use this as a guide. November, December of your junior year is really when you should be deciding, how am I going to prepare for this test? What curriculum am I going to use? So that as soon as the new year starts, you can immediately get into your preparation for the LSAT. That then gives you 6, 9, maybe even 10 or 11 months of solid preparation. If it turns out that you're ready to take the test before September and you're ready in April or May, then that's absolutely fine for you to take it. But by starting your preparation in January, you've got ample time to make sure that you are absolutely ready. You want to finish your curriculum, and then you want to make sure that you're spending lots of time actually practicing the test, initially under increasing amounts of time pressure, but then ultimately under test conditions, so that you can hopefully maintain that performance under those test conditions. Take the test when you're ready. So many people will take it because they see all of their peers taking it, a particular administration. And if you get a score that isn't helpful, very often what I see, at least anecdotally, is that people get in their own heads. And it's not that they can't improve, but the pressure of taking it a second time and feeling like you absolutely have to do better than you did the first time can be really counterproductive. You can absolutely take the test as late as October or November and still be very much in a position where you can apply early and certainly with ample time to be a really competitive applicant. Let's talk about personal statements. They are notoriously difficult to do well. And that's in part because they're asking you to do an awful lot in a very short essay. Now, most schools do not interview. There are schools that do, and with some rare exceptions, most of them don't interview until after they've looked at your application. Okay, there are a handful that will offer them before, like Baylor University. Their law school will actually allow you to interview before you've submitted an application, but by and large, your personal statement is the school's only real opportunity to get a sense of who you are, to understand why law school fits within your larger career plan, and why law school actually makes sense. If you can do this well, it will make a huge difference to the strength of your application. You have to remember that even though they will read what you do for LSAT writing, that's not really being given any real weight. They're looking at your personal statement as an example of what you think is your very best work. So we need to make sure that it's dialed in, and getting this right can be the difference between a rejection or a waitlist, or ultimately being admitted, even where your numbers are below the median. So if it's so difficult, how on earth do you go about writing one? A personal statement, it's a reading comprehension exercise. Every school has its own prompt. Now, while a lot of the prompts are very, very similar, it's very important that you read each of them, because some schools will have little tweaks, little creases in their prompt that if you miss, it shows that you haven't taken the time to really answer the question that that specific school is asking. As I said before, it's you saying, this is an example of my very best work. So it has to be exactly that. In most cases, as I said, it's the only chance an admissions committee will have to actually get to know you. And it's usually a 1 to 2 page statement, double spaced. There are exceptions. Some schools will give you 11-point font. Schools like Florida and Berkeley will give you up to 4 pages, but generally speaking, 1 to 2 pages. Again, read the prompt and be really clear on what the limitations are at each individual school. Now, a personal statement is not an editorial. It's not an opinion piece. And the reason for that is an opinion piece or an editorial doesn't, generally speaking, meet the criteria or reach the objective that a personal statement has. It's also really important not to tell a story about somebody who isn't applying to law school, somebody who isn't you. And I see that a lot with family members who have been really inspirational, but we have to remember that they're not the ones applying to law school. We want to avoid being overly or unnecessarily dramatic. We're not writing a sales copy. I've seen personal statements in first draft form that read much more like kind of a sales email with one sentence paragraphs, hard sell from the beginning. That's not what a personal statement is meant to do. We also don't want to just restate our resume. Law schools will read every single part of your application. So when you repeat information that is elsewhere, you're wasting space that could be used for new information that would be helpful to your case. So just remember, you might have the most awesome grandma or grandpa who did the most amazing things, but they're not the ones applying to law school. And that's not the person that the law schools need to get to know. They need to get to know you. Okay, so how do you go about writing this? Honestly, it begins with personal reflection, thinking through what you're proud of, what you have achieved, what lessons you have learned, but we're ultimately trying to focus on positive things that show who you are without you having to tell them. Take the time to sit down with a cup of coffee and a notepad and no phone, no smart devices for 30 minutes twice a week in the lead up to your application, and start writing down who are the people who have inspired you, what are those achievements, what are you proud of. And what you'll find is you start to come across some really interesting vehicles for a personal statement. Some people like to just write and get it down on a page, but I find that a lot of the time that burns through very precious enthusiasm. And by draft number 7 that hasn't gone anywhere, you start to get very frustrated. So my advice is plan some time putting together a skeleton for what your essay is going to look like. Because at 2 pages, double spaced, that might be 5, 6 paragraphs at a stretch. So it's really important that each one of them is doing something specific. So plan. 10 to 15 drafts of a personal statement is pretty standard. So be prepared to be patient and stick with it for the long haul. And as I said before, be really clear that you are addressing the specific prompt of the schools that you're applying to. Now, I mentioned the Supreme Court, and I mentioned how personal statements may be a thing that we see change fairly significantly. And I mention this because Harvard, who was actually a party to the Supreme Court litigation, has done away with personal statements altogether. And they've replaced them with a statement of purpose and a statement of perspective. And this comes back to the fact that the court said that you can still use holistic admissions, okay, which means looking at you as a complete applicant. And so what you see a lot of the time is, for example, with the GRE, it had been done for a long time by Arizona, and no one really cared too much until Harvard did it. And so I think this sets a very potential change that you might see. So if you're not applying this cycle, keep an eye out for this in the next 1 to 2 years, because I think you'll see a lot of other schools get rid of personal statements and use multiple statements to achieve the same thing. It does, however, make the point that diversity still matters to schools, okay? So if you're concerned that you as a complete applicant is not going to be captured, don't be, because the schools have gone out of their way to give you opportunities to include all of those factors in your application. Optional essays. Again, I really don't think that there is a really good argument for not writing an optional essay. As I said, your essays are in many ways the only chance most schools get to know you. Why this law school is very common. But again, there are schools out there that have sometimes 8 essays to choose from. Carefully read them, think about which ones best suit your writing style and interest, and take those essays very seriously. There are also going to be some changes that I think, as I said, with Harvard getting rid of personal statements, ASU actually has its own unique approach where they've just introduced essentially an elevator pitch video, which is a 30-second interview that you get to submit with your application. Now, that's not going to be for everybody. I know if I was applying, that would not be what I did, because that would not necessarily be my strong point. But the fact of it is here that there are lots of opportunities for you to show who you are. Carefully reading what each school allows you to do will make a big difference. Diversity essays. So as I said, the Supreme Court decision has changed how schools ask those questions, but they still care about it. And there are still going to be prompts that you can respond to that allow you to show how you have a different experience and a different perspective to offer to the class and to the learning experience. Let's talk about addendas. Addendas are generally, not always, but commonly left for negatives. Not always, but generally. So it might be a criminal issue, a character and fitness issue. Maybe you were at a party before you were 21 and you got an MIP. Not uncommon, not a reason that you can't go to law school, but an addenda is an opportunity for you to give a school context. For an addenda to be effective, it really has to do three things, and it must do all three things. It's really got to identify what that problem is. You have to take real ownership of that problem. It shows maturity when you own it. And then you can also explain why that issue is not going to be an issue that reoccurs in law school or in legal practice. You can also use an addenda for things like poor GPA. LSAT, you can use it for LSAT. The LSAT addendas are generally not as compelling as a lot of people think, but there may be good reasons, especially if you took it this cycle. There were a lot of issues with the August and September online tests. If you were caught up in that, that might be a pretty legitimate thing to talk about as an addenda topic. As I said, very brief, stick to the points. And if you were in a unique situation, for example, you maybe took a semester off to go and work, or you were in a really competitive academic program that no one outside of your school would understand, that is also an example where an addenda could be appropriate. Let's talk about resumes. Okay, so if you've ever gone to your career center, and if you haven't, you should, because they've got some really awesome resources there for you. They're going to tell you your resume should be a page, and they're correct because they're looking at it in the context of you getting an internship or a job. With law school, you have the added benefit of having up to 2 pages. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be 2 pages, but you have the space if what you're using the space for is meaningful and helpful to your case. You do not need to worry about an about section or an objective section because you're applying to law school. So we know what the objective is. Skills sections generally are not advised. Now, there are exceptions, right? If you have a very specific technical skill, that is something that can be included, but don't include things like English, Microsoft Office. These things are all assumed. Also, there's no need for you to include sections of color to kind of make it appealing to look at, or a photograph. Every line in that resume is precious real estate. And when you add a photograph or blocks of color, it takes away that real estate, which means you have less room to tell a school all the things that you've done. A resume is a record of everything that you've done. But I would encourage you to think of it as a predictive document instead of a historical document. Here's what I mean, and it might sound like a funny distinction, but here's what I'm getting at. If you worked as a server at Chili's, a lot of people would think that doesn't need to be on my law school resume. And if they did include it on their resume, what I see a lot of the times is they'll give me this long list of everything that they did while they were a server at Chili's. That's historical. Predictive means that it's on the resume, but we're emphasizing the things that suggest you're likely to do well if you're in law school. So an example would be this. You worked 25 to 30 hours a week. You still maintained a strong GPA. You were promoted to shift manager after the first 6 months, and you could go interstate for the summer and come back the fall, and there was a job waiting for you. Those things take up less space, but offer a school a lot more useful information rather than a big list of everything that you did as a server. Because the chances are the people on the committee probably worked as servers themselves. So we're really focusing on things that you think really deserve to be there. We want to emphasize your academics. So they're going to be at the forefront of your resume. Scholarships, honors and awards, any conferences or undergraduate reviews that you might have been a part of. We're going to emphasize those key points. Formatting is really important. It doesn't necessarily matter really how you format it, with the exceptions that I've mentioned, but however you decide to do it, you've got to be consistent. If you use bullets that are indented a certain degree, make sure that that is consistent throughout. If your dates are over to the right-hand side, aligned with that margin, make sure that every single section is formatted in the same way. Make sure that you're ordering the most recent right through to the oldest entry. Interests, include your interests. It's the least important section of your resume, but it helps give you a slice of personality. It helps make your resume a little bit more interesting to read. And if it's a generic interest like travel, try and make it more specific. Like, I enjoy traveling to national parks, or I visited 3 countries in Europe and I hope to visit 5 more by the time I turn 30. Try and avoid white space. Okay, if it's a page and a little bit, chances are you could probably make some changes and just get it to that one single page. Timing. I know we've got a lot to get through. So law schools do use rolling admissions. Okay, so in theory, the earlier you apply, the better off you are. But being early never beats being ready. Okay. A lot of schools do not see the majority of their applications come in until the new year. So if you're in by Thanksgiving, you are early. And even if you apply after that, you are always better off doing so when your application has been dialed in, when it's correct, precise, and exactly how you want it to be. Rolling admissions is also increasingly less of a factor. Schools are not getting your application on a Monday and then reviewing it that afternoon. Okay, a lot of the folks who make these decisions, they're at forums, they're visiting schools, they tend to read them in tranches. What you'll also find is that more recently, a lot of schools over-admitted. And so last cycle, you saw a lot of schools basically getting their pool of applicants and waiting. I had clients that put their applications in October and didn't hear until March. So I anticipate that this cycle will see something similar. So yeah, it's great to be early, but it never beats being prepared. So just in closing, there's a lot of folks who do what I do. But if you're thinking about working with a consultant, my advice is do a little digging about who you're working with. And unfortunately, what you'll find is that there's a lot of consultants who either never went to law school or they spent more time in law school than they did practicing law. And if you're not going to ask a pilot what it's like to be a dentist and how to be one, then law school shouldn't be any different. We've been really lucky at PrelawProm to have some great outcomes with folks getting into fantastic schools all over the country. And I'd love to be able to help you. So just remember, like, there's a lot at stake here. Getting it right the first time matters. Feel free to jump on that QR code. And as I said, I'm happy to talk to anybody for free who would like to maybe get a little bit more guidance on their own individual circumstances. Lisa, I know that was a little bit over time. We had to get through a lot of material, but I'd love to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. That was fantastic. We're going to have a Q&A session after this, so you can ask both of us questions. And Ben is humble and one of the kindest humans I know. He is the best in the business when it comes to his expertise in law school applications. So yes, there are a lot of people, but there is nobody like PrelawProm and Ben. So I'm just going to say that and put it out there. Victoria, Victoria, thank you so much for having us. Arizona State University Pre-Law Society. It is fantastic to be here tonight. Thank you for sharing your time and your space with us. Who am I? Why am I qualified to be here and speak to you? I've been a personal injury attorney since 2005. I met my husband in law school, school, and we opened up our own law firm in 2013. For the 12 of the last roughly 23 years, I was a law professor and a director of academic success and bar preparation at an ABA school here in Southern California, where I'm based out of. I conducted the first and only qualitative phenomenological study in legal education on what successful students do to thrive in law school. And I interviewed students and I took all of their processes from the moment they got their syllabus until the moment they took that final exam. I compiled it, eliminated the redundancies, and I was left with this beautiful picture of the most comprehensive process that students could possibly employ to succeed. And so I took that and I parlayed that knowledge into my book, 9 Steps to Law School Success, which you can look at and purchase on Amazon. It's pretty much anywhere. You can get if you go to Carolina Academic Press, you can get a discount on it. I really loved working with law students, but I knew that I had special expertise that could assist what I feel like where legal education was missing. So in 2020, I opened up the Law School Success Institute, and I'm kind of a good example of someone who has taken a law degree, and I've really done a lot of things with myself. One of the things that I'm most proud of is I created this course called the Law School Operating System. And so I know that no two law students think similarly. Or process or study the same. And so what I've done is I've taken my knowledge from my qualitative study, and I teach students across the nation 3 things. How do they think? How do they learn? How do they process information? How can we customize that very unique skill set and preference of the individual student to the 9-step study process that was the result of my study? And then how do students schedule each of those steps into every week of their semester? So that's what I do. You are the very first ones to see this. It is being launched next week. So I hope that if you have a moment, you can take a gander at it. What I wanted to talk about tonight, I know I only have a couple of minutes, but I want to talk about, here's what I wanted to teach you, show you. I want you to discover, really just understand the difference between undergrad and law school. I want to show you briefly how successful law students study, and then I'll show you what a typical week would look like for a law student. So you go into this with your eyes wide open. Let's jump into that first one. So really the difference between undergrad and law school, the biggest one I see is this. How many people have told you in your life that you are an overachiever, or you're highly accomplished, right? Or maybe you're a perfectionist, or maybe you've always been able to get good grades, or knowledge and information has come easy for you. So in undergrad, you may have really stood out as that exceptional player, right? Or anytime before law school. But when we get to law school, you're filled with people in the same room that are operating at that same level as you. And so they're all Steph Currys. I love Steph Curry and I love the Warriors, so forgive me. But I will use as many analogies as I can because I love this man. So then the difference becomes when you get to law school, everyone is operating at that same level. And so it gets a little bit competitive, and it gets students are accessing information at the same way that you typically are. So some of the other differences are really the workload. And they say that within that very first year of or semester of law school, in those 14 weeks, you will have read somewhere in the realm of 7,000 to 8,000 pages of information. And it's not just reading that you're doing, you're reading and you're briefing your cases and you're outlining and you're attending class. And so you have all of these things that you're doing to understand the main topics in each of your classes that your professors are going to be testing you on at the end of those 14 weeks. Which brings me to the next. Your grade in law school is typically based on one high stakes exam. So in undergrad, you might have a paper, or you may do really well regurgitating information to your professor that, back in that final paper or in that exam, if they give you an essay exam or multiple choice, regurgitating what you took notes of during class. But in law school, your final exam, you've never seen this type of fact pattern before. You've probably never discussed it in class. And the whole goal of the test, the essay exam, is for you to take the law that you know and you understand, apply it to that little fact pattern, that new fact pattern that you've never seen, and reach an outcome. The plaintiff will succeed, or the defendant will succeed in this case, and then explain why. So these things, really getting to that final exam, kind of you can see why time is precious in law school, right? And the grades are much stiffer. So where you might be used to, excelling and getting a 4.0 in undergrad, it stings the first time you get that first grade in law school. If it's anything less than that 4.0 or a 3.5 or a 3.0, while that 3.0 might actually equate to a 4.0 in law school terms, it's going to sting. And so you have to really understand what specifically was I doing when I studied, and what did my professor and wrote this essay answer, and what does my professor want from me? So it's this process of constantly assessing your performance. And so all of these things obviously bring you to stress. They cause stress. Students usually like to see this. Ben mentioned that there is really no major, although poli-sci seems to be a popular one. Law schools, and I sat on our law school that I taught at, I sat on our admissions committee, and I reviewed all these applications coming in. We did not have a preference for any single major from students. I loved when someone had a unique story or showcased the skill that we were interested in that would show us that you'd be a success in law school and on the bar exam through stories and through personal experiences and preferences. So you can kind of see where you fit in the pros and cons there. And that really wraps up the first piece. And so let's talk about the second piece. So what are students doing then to thrive in law school? Let me ask you this question. What are you currently doing? Have you ever actually really thought of, how do I succeed at ASU? Like, what am I doing that's making me be, like you said, Victoria, how are you getting that 4.0? Like close to 4.0. Do you know what you're doing, Victoria? And
Yeah,
other
I'm constantly looking over everything I've studied, taking notes, and reading a lot, I would say, on other things, and using different resources to help me as well. That's
Okay. It's a lot of work, right? Though. Okay, so great. So Victoria, from the beginning of the semester, what's the first thing that you do? What's the first step in your study process?
I contact the teachers first. I like make office hours, look at their office hours, and then ask them. And then I write, for example, a discussion post that's already available. I write that down and then say, "Hey, is this a good writing piece?" And they're like, "No, let me rip that apart so I can like know what the standard is for the rest of the school year." And then when I take a test, I make sure if it's like a horrible test for the first time, I go to the teacher office hours and stuff like that and say, "Hey, what can I do to make my grade go up?" So yeah, but I realized I can't do that in law school because someone told me the professors don't handhold.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm screwed, I guess.
You know what? That's a really good point. So what you can do is I'll show you what the 9-step study process is. And what you can do is when you finish a main topic, or if you have questions about the main topic as you're learning it before you finish it, you're always welcome to go to your professor's office hours or dean's fellows or people in the academic success department or professors teaching the same subject, but just not your specific teacher, your professor, and ask them, my understanding is A, B, C, and D. Am I correct or incorrect? Right? Like I'm stuck here. I wrote this practice essay. How did I do? Right? According to how you understood and organized that topic. I wrote this practice essay. Do you like my format? Do you like my organization? Right? So you can absolutely ask your professors, but you can't just go and show them, the book and say, can you explain this to me? You actually have to do the work to showcase that you're ready for the response, because they won't like it if you just go to them and say, hey, what do you want? Right? They want you to show them that you've done the work so they can give you feedback. Kaylee Galassi, what's your process?
So I always check syllabus first. So
Okay.
whenever I join a class, I'm looking through the syllabus to see what it's going to take to be successful and earn the correct grade that like I want to earn, which is usually an A, but sometimes it doesn't always work out. So I'm always checking syllabus and I'm seeing how like rigorous the course load is going to be and how I'm going to allocate enough time to each class to be successful.
Fantastic. And what do you do? So once you realize, okay, there's 10 things I'm going to learn in this class. It's a pretty rigorous course. What do you do to learn them?
Usually majority of my classes, I'm taking a lot of business classes and I've just gotten into some law ones. Normally I'll skim the reading for the week and I'll identify what I don't understand and what I do understand. And then I'll read it, close the book, and kind of like active recall, like regurgitate as much information that I can remember and then write it down. And what I don't remember, I'll just go back over and I'll just kind of start that throughout the week in order of like most important to like least important, depending on when the classes and the tests are.
Fantastic. Fantastic that you can articulate your process, both of you. Thank you for sharing. So what do you anticipate doing in law school? Has anybody thought about that? Is it Ariane Dingle? Have you thought about what you're going to do in law school?
Yeah, probably definitely a lot of pre-game stuff. I know that there would be a lot of readings even before you get into the class. So I'm actually pretty lost. Do you have any advice from your experience?
I have tons of advice. I have tons. Has anybody, Max, Sydney, HB, Omar, have you thought of what it's going to be like to study in law school?
I can go. So I've actually heard from a few law students that it's very important to outline all throughout the semester. So when I actually get to law school, I'll experiment with the outline process and refine it as I go to see how it works best for me.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Omar, I saw that you unmuted. Were you going to say something?
I would say just to make sure, like while you're reading, highlight everything and read back and just make sure that when you're reading everything, you comprehend everything you're reading and not just like reading it to read it.
Nice, absolutely. And so what you're mentioning is called metacognition. And so it's thinking about using pre-reading strategies during the reading and post-reading assessments to test your understanding for sure. Max, what do you have?
I was going to say, my sister's currently at a Sandra Day O'Connor, and from her personal experience, she's not, facing weekly assignments. The workload itself is much less vigorous compared to her undergrad. So she's, constantly studying every new concept she learns that week. She ensures that she understood every new concept that she faced that week. So just, constantly studying and making sure you are constantly staying up to date with the material throughout the entire school year.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you snowball, if you just get 2 assignments behind, it's going to snowball because the workload doesn't ease up, right? And even if your professor gets behind, they will always catch up. And there just simply isn't enough time to do everything you need to do with the material before the exam if you let it fall behind. So here's what most students do in law school. They read and they create a document that has everything they learned. They memorize that document and then they take the exam. It has everything. It has, it follows their books. It may have several sources. It may have notes from class. But what happens though is that they end up with a document that has bullet points and incomplete sentences that looks like this. And so then if they try to remember all that information, they typically have a difficulty in spitting that back to the professor in an organized manner. And so the solution really, and the results of my study are that the solution is that you take that information in the outline and you transform it into, after you finish the topic, what's called an essay approach. And so you can see very clearly all that information on the right is pulled, extrapolated from that outline on the left. And that's what the student ends up memorizing and then writing once they get to the exam if they're tested on battery. You can also see if your professor asks you to just discuss one element, intent, for example, of battery, how easy it is for your brain to categorize and pull intent out of the folder of potential topics that you're being tested on. So the 9-step study process, that's the result of my study. The first thing that successful law students do is they gain a big picture of the subject. And they do this by looking at commercial outlines. And they're just looking at it and they're just previewing it, just not reading in detail, just to understand the bounds and the framework of what they potentially could learn once they take torts or contracts or evidence or criminal procedure, civil procedure. The second thing they do is that they go to their syllabi or their syllabus and they deconstruct it and they understand specifically what their professor wants them to learn this upcoming semester. And they create a 1-page checklist of all of the main topics and their subtopics so that they know for step 3 how many outlines they should have for each class. So for example, on your desktop of your computer, you'll have one folder for every subject you're taking, and then you click on it, let's say contracts, and let's say the first main topic is contract formation. And so you'll have the second main topic of defenses to formation, and the third one, right? And all of the topics. You will have the number of outlines equal the number of main topics you're about to learn. 3, 4, and 5 are what law students do when they're studying. So they are outlining simultaneously, reading and briefing every case. Briefing is a format that is typically rarely graded. You're not graded on your case briefs. It's a way for you to understand the issue of the opinion that you're reading, the rule, the court's reasoning, and why they got to their outcome, and any procedural history in that case. Going to class and absorbing the lecture after they've done steps 3, 4, and 5. And once they finished that first main topic and every main topic, they transform it into what we call that approach, which we discussed. They're not done yet. So, and Victoria, and we mentioned Kaylee, this is where they go to the professor and they write a practice exam and they ask the professor for feedback on that exam. And so they say, hey, this is how I've organized it. This is how I write it. Here's what my format looks like, my issue, my rule. Here's me applying the facts to the rule, and here's me concluding, how did I do? And so that's much better way for the professor to understand if the student really truly understands the material. And then last, after you get that feedback from your professor, assessing your performance and making any modifications to those essay approaches. So this is the 9-step study process that successful law students employ for every main topic they learn in each of their classes. So really, how then do we get each of those steps for every main topic into every week? It's like a snapshot of a weekly calendar looks just like this. And so the first thing students do is they put their classes, and the classes here are in green. The next thing that they do is they put a review of that outline that they created, just to look and see what they're about to discuss in class and to see if they had any questions. They also then they decide which days they're going to do their reading. Some students can go a full day, a 6, 7, 8-hour day to get all the reading done, reading, briefing, and outlining, which happens simultaneously. Some students want to do criminal law for 2 hours, property for 2 hours, and contracts for 2 hours on Saturday. And then they do the same thing and finish the other half of the assignment on Sunday. Just depends on how you do it. You can see in red is where they're transforming when they finish a topic, and they're transforming that outline with everything for that main topic into how they'll write it. In that aqua color is where they're writing a practice exam, and they're doing step 8 and 9, going to their professor and getting feedback. So that's what a sample week looks like. I highly encourage you to make sure that you get a 30-minute walk in each day. So you're still a human, but if you schedule your time and you include each of the steps into every day like this, and you can see very specifically what you need to do, it just becomes a habit, everyone. And you want it to become a habit because habits are really hard to break. And so the more consistency you can put into your schedule by having a step-by-step process and a very specific scheduling method, the better you'll feel, the easier you'll sleep. Everything will just will feel like you're giving 100% of yourself every single day. And so really quick, my final thought is on practice. The brain, although it's an organ, it functions much more akin to a muscle. And so we're not born with a finite amount of intelligence. So if you look at these two people, they were asked to draw a self-portrait of themselves. And and then after that, they were given 6 weeks of training from an expert self-portrait artist on how to draw a picture of themselves. And after 6 weeks, the lady on the left went from that picture to the picture on the right with just training, the right amount of training from an expert who knew what they were doing. Similarly, the gentleman went from that picture on the left to that picture on the right, just from training, and nothing changed other than that, just getting advice and an understanding from someone who knew what they were doing. So you too can do the exact same thing in law school, learn the skills, and it doesn't matter what your LSAT score is, your undergrad GPA, your grades in law school. If you're not scoring where you want, you still can succeed in law school. I strongly believe that. And I'm here. Please follow me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk to you if you have any questions, just like Ben. And we've got 5 minutes before our time is up. If anybody has any questions to ask either of us, we are here for you. Let us know.
I did see, Lisa, there was a question from Omar about languages other than English on the resume. Omar, the answer to that is that 100% gets included on your resume. It's more just not listing things that are assumed, like I said, Microsoft Office or English proficiency. But if you have a proficiency in another language, 100% I would include that on your resume. I hope that helps.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, I have another question. Do you guys hear me well? Just make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is for Ben. Do you offer like LSAT studying services since pre-law? I don't know if I got that. I don't know in your
Yeah.
presentation. Sorry. You do. Okay, perfect.
No. So I
Okay.
know. Yes to your question. I don't do law school. Sorry, I focus on the admission side of things
Okay.
because, as I alluded to at the back end, people. I like to stay in my lane. There are some people out there who have scored, multiple times perfect scores on the LSAT. I'm going to leave the LSAT to them, and I focus on the admissions piece, from the application right through to negotiating scholarships, navigating wait lists. But then I also have people that I work with closely where I have great relationships with, who are LSAT professionals who I send a lot of my clients to so that they can see if they're a good fit for them. And if so, we work very closely together.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much.
Hi, this is Ariane. I had a question for both of you. I guess for Ben first, I guess, but also this applies to both of you. Do you guys have like an ideal time or like, I guess, step in either law school or law school application process where you think it's best to use either of your service? So for example, like Ben, do you get students that are, have graduated from undergrad already? And then Lisa, are most of your clients, L1, or do you still get clients that are about to graduate?
I can jump on that quickly, and then I know Lisa will have some good insights on that. So most of my clients are actually college students who are going K to JD. But I also have clients who've been out for 2 or 3 years. I got one client who's 52. So it's the whole spectrum. In terms of timing, I always love to get connected with students in the summer so that we can come up with an actual strategy and plan for the entire fall. So we can have plans for when to take the test, rough plans for when we want to get everything submitted. But I sometimes will have people come to me in January and we'll turn stuff around. If you really want to be quick about it, you can do this in 30 days. If you really want to get it done that quickly. But ideally, I like to start working with people as early as I can so that we can plan ahead and make it as painless as possible.
Same for me. So a lot of students that I work with, I work with students all the way up to in their last semester of their 4, L year if they're part-time. So if they're part-time, they're going 4 years. So incoming law students that are just about to go and who want to learn how to study to go to law school, students typically in their first semester that need that where their law school isn't giving them an orientation or teaching them the skill of how to study. I work with students on academic probation. I work with successful students who know they're capable of more. I work with first generation professional programs, students, being a first gen myself. I work with students that are ready to take the bar and they're ready to transition and they want to know how to study for the bar and that they've been using the 9 steps and they're ready to apply them to taking the bar exam. So I kind of work all over the place, all throughout, wherever students need me. The best spot is if you're going into law school, you're an incoming 1L that, take my course or meet with me for 90 minutes, hour, however long you need, 2 weeks before school starts so that you start the process.
Thanks, I really appreciate that. And I like how you pointed out that, these skills are transferable all the way to the bar, preparing for the bar exam also. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're so welcome. My pleasure.
Stacey asked a good question. She said, would it look good or bad if I graduate early? I did summer school and was dual enrolled in classes. Okay, so Stacey, really good question. One of the things I think that people don't talk about is if you do end up going to law school early and you're not 21, you can actually end up missing out on a lot of really important networking opportunities. So that's the first thing I would say. And a lot of people just don't even think about that. I won't say which school it was, but it was a Texas school that fairly recently admitted a student who was 16. And so obviously that student missed out on all of the major firm networking events because there was alcohol being served. So there's that piece of it. Law schools, I think, generally really value that maturity that really only comes with a little bit of age. You might be a super mature 19-year-old. You'll be a more mature person at 25 than you are now, even if you're mature for 19. So if you're going to graduate early, you absolutely can go, and there will be, opportunities for you to go straight into law school. But law, it's one of these careers, it's like a big freight train. And when you get on the train, it's really hard to stop. It's hard to just stop for 3 years. It can be done, and then jump off and then jump back in. So once you start that train, you're on a trajectory. And so that's why I think there's a lot of benefit in getting some work experience first, not because you're not going to go to law school, but it's going to give you some unique perspectives. I'll give you an example. When I first started out, I started out in property before I went into litigation. And I was advising people on commercial leases. I didn't even have a credit card. I'd never bought a house. I'd signed sublets all my way through law school. So I was advising clients on documents that, even though I understood the legal component, I'd had no life experience with. And so I think if you're graduating early, give some thought to just maybe getting some work experience first. But in saying that, if you time everything right in terms of the LSAT, there's no reason why you couldn't go straight away. But I think there's some benefit in getting some rust, so to speak, before you go.
I went straight from kindergarten to law school. So I was 20, you did as well, right, Ben?
Yeah.
I was 20, and I knew personally for me that if I took time off, I don't know that I necessarily would have gone to law school. I don't know that I would have done it, because I know myself, and I know I would have found a passion. Just like I got very passionate about law school. So, when I took property, I had no idea what a mortgage was, obviously the same thing. And so classes like that or situations like that, I just had never been in before. And so students that, were in their mid-20s, or, I went to a law school, there was a lot of evening students, which were working professionals. So they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s. And as a professor, I've taught, my oldest student was in her 70s. And so, you're going to meet extraordinary people at all different ages. And it's just a real personal thing. I think yourself, and if you can get through that, but there's definitely older students in law school.
I might just, if I could, Lisa, just add one other thing. So I had an opportunity coming out of law school to go and work for the government, and it would have required that I would have had to sign a contract that would have meant I could not have left that job for a minimum of 5 years, which would have left me at like 26, 27, something like that. And I went to law school at 18. Okay, that's not because I'm special. That's because of where I started my career. But the point is, my immaturity was like 26, 27. Good grief. Like, my whole life is going to be over. So I passed on this opportunity that I have, to be frank with you, I've always regretted. And it was because I was in such a rush. So there's this tension, I think. If you really know this is 100% what I want to do, then by all means go for it. And we both did that. But there are also some opportunities that might come your way that you don't fully appreciate if you haven't had a little bit more life experience. So that's just something to make your decision more complicated.
Are there any other questions? You can ask us anything about our practice, about anything you'd like. All right. I think that's going to wrap it. That's a W for us.
I will say Lisa and I are both super active on LinkedIn. So please, by all means, connect with us. More than happy to speak with you. We both are more than happy to engage with you on LinkedIn as well, if you've got questions that maybe you didn't want to ask in the group setting and you want to follow up with us separately.
Absolutely. Yep. I know LinkedIn might seem like that's like the old school, like, oh, there's like a lot of older people in there. They just talk about stuffy. LinkedIn is phenomenal. And I just got on it a year and a half ago because I prescribed to that. And I love LinkedIn. I've made so many. Ben is one of my like favorite colleagues. We met on LinkedIn. So join LinkedIn and start your network. Just start connecting with other attorneys and law students so that you can, understand their lived experiences as well. Your comments are so sweet. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us both. We really enjoyed speaking with you all.
Thank you.